If you stop and think about how we build the digital world today, it's practically flawless.
Hmm.
You have software engineers sitting in San Francisco conceptualizing $1 trillion artificial intelligence ecosystem that lives entirely in the cloud.
Right, and they're deploying millions of lines of code globally in milliseconds, pushing updates to billions of devices simultaneously, and it all runs with just absolute pinpoint precision.
Exactly. The feedback loops are instantaneous. You find a bug, you deploy a patch, you optimize the system, and the entire global network improves overnight.
It is a marvel of iteration, really. I mean, the speed is staggering.
But then, you take the elevator down from that pristine, optimized tech office, you step out onto the actual physical street in that very same city, and suddenly that precision just completely evaporates.
Yeah, it's jarring. The physical system isn't just buggy. I mean, for a long time, it felt fundamentally broken.
Right. We're looking at a city that literally invents the future of human-computer interaction.
Yeah.
Yet, historically struggled to, keep its own sidewalks clear of debris or put a roof over its most vulnerable residents.
It's the ultimate paradox of modern urban life, really. The friction between this frictionless digital acceleration and massive physical civic stagnation.
Yeah, we can code a virtual world perfectly, but we stumble when pouring concrete or managing a city block.
Exactly. And that tension is exactly what we are exploring today.
Welcome to a deep dive into the hidden mechanics that make or break a modern metropolis. We're focusing on San Francisco today, specifically looking at the city right now in the year 2026.
And we're using a highly detailed, honestly incredibly granular blog post titled Netizen, San Francisco Governance Issues, as our guiding map.
Right. Now, the author steps into some deeply contested political waters here, critiquing progressive governance models and analyzing a recent shift toward more centrist, enforcement-heavy policies.
Yeah, and we should clarify right up front for everyone listening, our goal isn't to take a political side here.
No, not at all.
What makes this document fascinating is that it grounds these observations entirely in structural mechanics and outcomes rather than ideology.
Right. It's strictly about cause and effect. We are just impartially unpacking the author's arguments and data to see how the machine actually works.
It operates as a diagnostic manual for urban dysfunction. So regardless of where anyone falls on the political spectrum, we're looking at the raw data of how a city operates.
And our mission today goes way beyond just analyzing one city's struggles, right? Or even celebrating its recent wins. This is really a masterclass in urban governance for you, the listener, to apply to your own hometown.
Because we're going to unpack the underlying machinery of why incredibly wealthy cities sometimes fail to deliver the most basic services.
Yeah, and to truly understand that, we have to pull ourselves out of the local bubble. We'll be examining completely different operating models.
Right. Contrasting San Francisco with the strict technocracy of Singapore and the deregulated, sprawling free market of Houston to see what actually drives results.
So let's set the scene first. It is mid-2026. According to our source, San Francisco is undergoing a massive vibe shift under Mayor Daniel Lurie.
A very noticeable shift, yeah.
And this is a city of immense, almost incomprehensible wealth, sitting on some of the most beautiful natural real estate on the planet. Yet, for years leading up to this point, it was internationally famous for a cascading series of overlapping crises.
The visual of San Francisco for a long time was dominated by homelessness, rampant open-air drug markets, particularly in neighborhoods like the Tenderloin and Soma, and soaring property crime.
The car break-ins?
Right, those infamous car break-ins known locally as bipping, where thieves would systematically smash car windows block by block.
It was wild, and you combine that with a housing market so artificially restricted and expensive that it actively displaced the working class, and you had a recipe for civic collapse.
So the core question driving this entire conversation is twofold. First, how did a city with this much money, generating this much tax revenue, and populated by this much top-tier talent let things get so bad?
Yeah, and second, our source notes some really positive recovery metrics in 2026 under the new administration.
Yeah.
We need to figure out if that recovery is actually built to last.
Let's look at the dysfunction first, because the wealth to dysfunction ratio in San Francisco is staggering.
It really is. Now, when I look at the local government on paper, it says San Francisco has a strong mayor system. My assumption is that this means the mayor is essentially the CEO of the city, right?
You think so, yeah.
Like they issue a directive, the departments execute, and things get done.
The title strong mayor is highly deceptive in this context. You'd expect executive authority, but the reality the source outlines is an administrative labyrinth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the city is paralyzed by layers upon layers of boards, commissions, and overlapping agencies that have slowly been written into the city charter over decades.
I imagine it's like a corporate CEO who decides the company needs a new logistics software. But before they can even solicit a bid, they have to get unanimous approval from 7 different independent employee committees.
Exactly. And half of whom actively distrust the CEO.
Right. So nothing happens.
The friction is intentional. The city charter itself is incredibly rigid, heavily favoring the status quo. The author describes it as a system designed with far more ways to say no than to say yes.
Because any single stakeholder with a grievance can just pull the emergency brake on a project.
Precisely. And one of the most critical hidden mechanisms driving this paralysis is a practice called ballot box budgeting.
Now, I've always found ballot box budgeting fascinating because on its face, it sounds like the purest form of democracy, you know?
Yeah, it sounds great in theory.
Let the voters decide exactly where their tax dollars go via a direct proposition. But the source paints this as a structural disaster. I'm trying to visualize how giving voters direct control actually breaks the machine.
Well, the breakdown happens in the fragmentation of the city's financial agility.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
When voters mandate via a proposition that a specific new tax revenue stream must be spent solely on a specific issue, say a dedicated business tax exclusively for early childhood education or homeless services, that money is legally locked in a silo.
Ah, so it bypasses the normal budgeting process.
Yeah.
The mayor and the city council or the board of supervisors, in SF's case, they just can't touch it.
They absolutely cannot. So imagine a scenario where the city faces a massive sudden deficit, perhaps from a drop in commercial real estate value.
Which definitely happens.
Right. And they need to rapidly reallocate funds to keep basic sanitation running.
Like keeping the garbage trucks moving.
Exactly. They might have hundreds of billions of dollars sitting in a dedicated proposition account that can only be spent on a highly specific program, and it is legally untouchable for anything else.
Wow, so you could have a fortune sitting there while the streets literally pile up with trash.
It fragments the budget into dozens of competing fiefdoms, locking in spending without any requirement for systemic audits or performance reviews.
Which is crazy.
You end up with billions of dollars heavily siloed and an executive branch that has no real control over the city's wallet.
Which explains the historical disconnect between spending and results. I mean, let's look at the sheer scale of the numbers the source brings up. In peak years, San Francisco was spending over $1 billion annually just on homelessness.
$1 billion.
Yes, $1 billion. Localized to a city of about 47 square miles. And yet groups like Wallet Hub were consistently ranking San Francisco near the very bottom of major cities for operational efficiency.
It was this bizarre, high-tax, high-spend environment delivering middling to poor, basic street-level services.
So the sheer volume of spending raises the obvious diagnostic question, right? Where was the friction eating the capital?
Well, the source argues that for decades, the dominant political culture in the city prioritized ideological purity and expansive social programs over measurable, audited outcomes.
Meaning they cared more about the idea behind the program than whether it actually worked.
Exactly. There was a heavy reliance on a harm reduction model and the provision of supportive housing. Now, supportive housing is incredibly complex. It's not just handing someone keys.
Right. It comes with massive ongoing service and maintenance costs.
And what really struck me in the source's data is that while the city was offering shelter and emergency care, a significant percentage of those shelter offers were actually being declined by individuals on the street.
Wait, really? They were turning it down?
Yes. It wasn't just a lack of beds. Severe addiction and profound mental illness deeply complicated the outreach.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But the city's structural approach lacked any real mechanism for rapid, accountability-focused interventions when people refused help.
Right. The historical approach prioritized individual autonomy and the decriminalization of low-level public offenses.
But when you pair a hands-off enforcement approach with an absolute lack of mandatory treatment for individuals in the grip of severe public mental health crises or addiction, the street-level reality degrades rapidly.
You get the visible disorder, the accumulated trash, the biohazards, the sprawling encampments that ultimately turned a world-class city into a cautionary tale.
But the narrative shifts, in the source's update for 2025 and 2026. The data is showing a sharp, undeniable turnaround under Mayor Daniel Lurie.
The numbers are striking.
They really are. Unsheltered homelessness is down roughly 22%, hitting its lowest point in 15 years according to the point-in-time counts. Tents on the street have plummeted by 85%.
And property crimes and car break-ins have also seen a massive reduction. The Lurie administration partnered heavily with state agencies like the California Highway Patrol, implemented proactive, visible policing, and focused relentlessly on clearing street conditions.
So the overall violent crime rate dropped roughly 22%. By almost every measurable metric, the physical environment of the city is undeniably cleaner and safer than it was just 3 years prior.
So we have a city that was functionally frozen, and now the gears are actually turning.
But considering how we just discussed the fundamentally broken nature of the city charter, I want to try an analogy to understand how this is happening. Let me know if this tracks.
Okay, let's hear it.
San Francisco's local government feels like a premium smartphone that has been completely bogged down by dozens of bloatware background apps.
Oh, I like this.
It has a massive battery that's the immense wealth and tax base. It has a top-tier processor, the intellectual and tech talent of the residents. But the screen is completely frozen because every single background app, every commission, every ballot box proposition, every review board is fighting for RAM at the exact same time.
That's incredibly accurate. The system is consuming massive amounts of energy just to manage its own internal background friction.
Right. But if that's the case, I have a major lingering question. The source explicitly mentions that despite the 22% drop in homelessness, residents in hard-hit neighborhoods like the Tenderloin are still reporting persistent visible drug dealing.
Yeah, it's not a solved problem.
The author notes that the progress feels uneven and reversible. If the data is showing such dramatic improvement across the board, why does this turnaround feel so incredibly fragile to the people actually living there?
Well, the fragility exists because the underlying operating system of your smartphone hasn't actually been rewritten. The city charter is still just as rigid today as it was 5 years ago. Those independent commissions still exist. The ballot box budgeting mandates are still legally binding.
So the bloatware is all still installed?
Entirely. The recent gains rely almost entirely on the sheer, sustained political willpower of the current leadership.
So the mayor and the current board of supervisors are essentially overriding the system's natural tendency toward gridlock by applying immense, highly focused executive effort.
Exactly. They are forcing the frozen phone to work by constantly hard resetting it and manually closing apps.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. But because they haven't achieved a true institutional fix like a comprehensive charter reform to strip away those commissions and streamline authority, the system is just waiting to revert.
Wow.
The moment that political willpower falters or a new administration takes over that doesn't prioritize street-level execution, the city's default setting is to snap right back to paralysis.
That is a terrifying prospect for the residents, relying entirely on the personality and energy of the person in the mayor's office rather than the resilience of the institutions.
It's a huge vulnerability.
So if San Francisco's fundamental fatal flaw is this fragmentation, the endless veto points, and a culture of perpetual negotiation, what happens if you strip all of those away?
Well, if we want to see the polar opposite of the San Francisco model, the source points us across the Pacific. Let's look at the strict technocracy of Singapore.
The contrast here is jarring, but incredibly illuminating. Singapore is a sovereign island city-state in Southeast Asia. We're talking about a population of roughly 5.9 million people living in an area of about 280 square miles.
And for context, San Francisco has about 800,000 to 870,000 people packed into just 47 square miles.
So Singapore is much larger in scope, but they share that intense urban density, massive economic output, and status as a global financial hub.
But structurally, the operating system couldn't be more alien to an American municipal structure.
Our source details Singapore's setup, and it's wild. Singapore has absolutely no layers of city, county, state, and federal bureaucracy to fight through.
Right. Because it is a sovereign nation, the executive power is heavily concentrated at the very top, primarily in the prime minister and the cabinet.
It is the ultimate expression of centralized technocracy.
When Singapore wants to build a new transit line, they don't have to negotiate with the state governor, they don't have to wait on federal environmental impact grants from a separate national capital, and they don't have local city councils vetoing the route.
The national government just handles the entire life cycle of the project.
Furthermore, their civil service is strictly, rigorously merit-based.
Yeah, the source mentions this. You don't get a high-level government job because of political patronage or activism.
No, you get it because you scored the highest on rigorous examinations and demonstrated absolute technical competence.
The source uses a phrase that really stuck out to me: Singapore Inc. They treat governance not as a political battlefield, but as highly competent corporate management.
And that corporate mindset rests on a foundation of absolute zero tolerance for corruption.
Which is fascinating how they achieve that.
Government ministers in Singapore are paid salaries comparable to private sector CEOs, which attracts top talent, but they face extraordinarily harsh, career-ending penalties for even minor ethical breaches.
Because the government operates with such clean efficiency, it retains the moral authority to demand strict adherence to the rules from its citizens.
I want to contrast that corporate management style with how the author describes San Francisco. San Francisco is depicted as a state of perpetual negotiation among stakeholders.
Oh, I love that description. It's like an endless, exhausting town hall meeting where everyone has a microphone, everyone has a veto, and nothing gets decided.
Singapore, conversely, just looks at the data, makes a decision, and executes.
Let's observe how that unhindered execution plays out in two massive areas of urban life: law enforcement and housing.
Singapore utilizes a highly pragmatic, almost ruthless mix of pure capitalism and heavy state intervention.
Right on the enforcement side, it is famous globally for its broken windows approach to public order.
There is no tolerance for low-level physical decay. Fines for littering, fines for spitting, fines for bringing chewing gum into the country.
And they have incredibly severe drug laws, including the death penalty for trafficking. It's the ultimate clean streets policy enforced with an iron fist.
But the housing aspect is what really surprised me in the source, because you'd think a corporate capitalist hub would just let developers build whatever they want.
Right, but they actually have a massive, centrally planned, state-run public housing system.
The Housing and Development Board, or HDB.
Yeah.
And we need to clarify, this is not public housing in the way Americans typically imagine it.
Which is often stigmatized, underfunded, and isolated blocks for the poorest residents.
Exactly. In Singapore, roughly 80% of the entire resident population lives in HDB flats.
80%. That is a staggering figure.
These are high-quality, heavily subsidized, meticulously maintained high-rises, and they even enforce strict ethnic quotas within every single building to ensure social integration and actively prevent segregated enclaves from forming.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanics of how a government actually acquires that much prime real estate in a wealthy city. Like, how do they get the land?
The mechanism is a powerful piece of legislation called the Land Acquisition Act, passed in the 1960s.
Okay, what did that do?
It granted the government the authority to compulsorily acquire private land for public development, often at below market rates historically, though, that has evolved.
But the core principle was that the state's need to house its population and build infrastructure superseded individual holdout rights.
Exactly. They completely bypassed the local resistance that paralyzes American cities by centralizing the land and building the supply themselves.
And regarding those ethnic quotas, how do they actually enforce that when someone wants to sell their flat? Because people move, right?
It's mechanically enforced at the point of sale in the resale market. If a building has reached its maximum allowable quota for a specific ethnic group, a seller of that ethnicity can only sell to a buyer of the same ethnicity, or they have to wait.
Wait, really? The government tracks that?
Oh, yeah. The government's digital portal literally tells you if you are eligible to buy a specific unit based on the building's current demographic makeup.
That is a level of social engineering that would be unconstitutional in the United States.
Without a doubt. But in Singapore, they view housing abundance and social cohesion not as political talking points, but as the foundational prerequisites for national survival and economic growth.
Okay, I have to challenge this premise here. It is very easy to look at pictures of spotless Singaporean streets or read about their 80% home ownership rate and feel a deep sense of civic envy.
Sure, it looks great on the surface.
But the source explicitly notes the massive trade-offs. Singapore has very limited political competition. The People's Action Party has maintained dominance since 1959.
Right. There are strict restrictions on freedom of speech, assembly, and the press. It is a very top-down, highly controlled society.
So how can a U.S. city like San Francisco, which is built inside a vibrant, incredibly noisy, messy, rights-based democracy, actually extract any usable lessons from Singapore without just secretly wishing for an authoritarian who will clean the streets?
That is the essential tension of comparing the two, and it's a very necessary critique. But the source is very deliberate in its takeaway here.
What's the takeaway?
San Francisco does not need to abandon its democratic soul or adopt Singapore's restrictive political model to succeed. What San Francisco desperately needs to borrow are the underlying mechanics of accountability.
I think I see where you're going, but let's break down what the mechanics of accountability actually look like in a democratic context.
It means looking at the specific levers of administrative power. You don't need a one-party state to rewrite your city charter so that the democratically elected mayor actually has the sole authority to hire and fire department heads.
Instead of waiting on an independent civilian commission to grant permission.
Exactly. You don't need to ban chewing gum or restrict protests to decide that you will relentlessly audit your billion-dollar homelessness spending.
And legally tie future funding to actual measurable outcomes, like individuals successfully housed or treated, rather than just funding the administrative process of the nonprofits.
Precisely. It's about shifting the structural dial from prioritizing ideology and process over to data and outcomes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
It's about streamlining the permitting process at City Hall so that an entrepreneur doesn't need 3 years of environmental review to open an ice cream shop.
Or a builder doesn't face endless appeals to construct a 4-unit apartment building.
You can absolutely have a loud, protesting, fiercely vibrant democracy that also has a highly efficient civil service and a streamlined bureaucracy.
So the lesson from Singapore isn't that authoritarianism is good. The lesson is that execution discipline matters just as much as your political ideals.
Exactly. A poorly executed progressive ideal still results in a person sleeping on the concrete.
I think that distinction is crucial. You can run the Singapore Inc. software on the American democracy hardware. You just have to configure the permissions correctly.
I love that framing.
But let's say adopting the mindset of a sovereign, centrally planned Asian city-state is just too much of a psychological leap for a Californian city.
Which realistically it probably is.
What if we look for an American peer? Because if Singapore solves its housing crisis through massive centralized state control, our next case study solves it by doing the exact opposite.
Right. If San Francisco is the overregulated nightmare, our next city is the deregulated Wild West.
If we are looking for a massive, wealthy American peer that has actually figured out how to build housing and keep costs relatively stable, Houston, Texas is the prime case study.
It represents a radically different philosophy of land use.
The source drops a fact about Houston that still completely breaks my brain every time I hear it. Houston is the only major U.S. city without comprehensive, use-based zoning.
It is a profound anomaly in American urban planning. In almost every other major American city, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, the city map is carved up into heavily regulated, colored blocks.
Right, like this specific block is legally restricted only for single-family homes. This block is only for commercial retail. This block is for light industrial.
Houston simply does not do that.
I'm trying to picture what that actually looks like. Does that mean a developer could literally buy a lot and build a 40-story skyscraper right next to a quaint suburban farmhouse?
Well, it's a common misconception that Houston is complete anarchy, but it isn't. Land use is still governed by citywide development ordinances.
Oh, okay. So there are some rules.
They have rules regarding subdivision plats, required setbacks from the street, parking minimums, and infrastructure capacity requirements. Furthermore, about 25% of the city is covered by private, legally binding deed restrictions.
Like covenants agreed upon by homeowners associations.
Exactly. But crucially, there is no top-down, citywide zoning map dictating exactly what use can be built where.
So if the market data says there is massive demand for a mixed-use apartment building on a specific vacant block, developers can generally buy the land and build it without spending 5 years begging a zoning board for a variance.
Yep, they just build it. But the real magic of Houston's affordability, according to the source, wasn't just the overall lack of zoning. It was a very specific set of targeted reforms around something called minimum lot sizes.
I want to dive deep into the mechanics of this because this feels like the absolute secret sauce for solving a housing shortage.
It really is a masterclass in how a tiny, almost invisible regulatory change can reshape an entire city.
So what were the rules prior to 1998?
Houston looked at its urban core, the highly desirable area inside the I-610 loop, and realized they were artificially constrained. The existing city ordinance legally required that any residential lot had to be at least 5,000 square feet.
Which, if you visualize it, basically means you can only build a traditional, sprawling, suburban-style single-family home with a front yard and a big backyard.
Exactly the issue. You literally couldn't legally build anything denser, even if people wanted to buy it.
So what do they do?
In 1998, city leaders reduced that minimum lot size from 5,000 square feet all the way down to 3,500 square feet. And in some specific cases, provided developers included certain open space provisions, they allowed it to drop as low as 1,400 square feet.
Wait, 1,400? That's a massive drop.
It's massive, yeah. And it was so successful that in 2013, they expanded this rule citywide to any neighborhood where the sewer and water infrastructure could handle it.
Walk me through the physical transformation of a block when that law passed. What did developers actually do?
The math of development completely flipped overnight. Suddenly, a builder could buy one aging house sitting on a 5,000 square foot lot, tear it down, legally subdivide that lot into 3 smaller parcels, and build 3 narrow vertical townhouses in its place.
Wow.
The market response was explosive. According to the source, developers built over 25,000 to 34,000 of these small lot units in the subsequent years.
They functionally legalized what urban planners call missing middle housing. Townhomes, duplexes, small infill development.
And they did it without floating massive government subsidy bonds or creating new public housing agencies.
They just got a tiny arbitrary piece of regulation out of the way and let the market satisfy the demand.
Exactly.
But here is the political mystery, and this is what I don't get. How did they pull that off without getting voted out of office?
What do you mean?
Well, in California, the moment a mayor suggests allowing townhomes in a single-family neighborhood, the homeowners revolt and tie the city up in lawsuits.
Aha, this is perhaps the greatest political innovation of the Houston model, the opt-out mechanism.
The opt-out mechanism.
The city government recognized that they couldn't force a blanket upzoning on the entire city without triggering a massive organized homeowner revolt.
So they included a pressure release valve.
Exactly. They allowed specific, unified neighborhoods to legally opt out of the minimum lot size reduction.
Oh, that is brilliant.
If a neighborhood wanted to keep their strict 5,000 square foot minimums, they could gather signatures, file the paperwork with the city, and essentially freeze their neighborhood in amber.
So they basically diffused the loudest, wealthiest opposition by letting them keep their exclusive bubble.
The political calculus was perfect. The highly organized, affluent neighborhoods, the ones most likely to hire lawyers and block the reform, opted out and stayed static.
But the vast, vast majority of the city, particularly working-class areas and commercial corridors, didn't organize to opt out.
And across that massive expanse of land, the market went to work and tens of thousands of homes were built. Houston expanded the city's overall housing supply dramatically by identifying and flowing entirely through the path of least political resistance.
I think we need another analogy here to really cement the difference between these two American cities. Houston's approach is like a massive, dynamic buffet.
A buffet, okay, I'm with you.
The developers look at the buffet table, figure out what the local population is hungry for, say, small, affordable townhomes for young professionals, and they just start cooking and putting it online.
Right, and San Francisco.
San Francisco, on the other hand, operates like an incredibly exclusive, rigid, pre-fixed set menu.
And it's not just a set menu, it's a set menu where every single ingredient of every single dish has to be reviewed by a neighborhood committee before the chef is allowed to turn on the stove.
Right. You order a simple chicken dish, a basic apartment building, and you have to wait 3 years for a comprehensive environmental review.
Then a neighbor files an administrative appeal because the new building might cast a shadow on their garden for 20 minutes a day.
Then the city's Architectural Design Review Board demands you change the facade to match the historical aesthetic of the block. By the time the food actually arrives at the table, it costs $3 million, and absolutely nobody can afford it.
The consequences of that hyper-regulation map perfectly to the reality of San Francisco's economy over the last 2 decades.
San Francisco generated an unprecedented historic boom in technology and biotech jobs. They invited hundreds of thousands of high-earning, highly educated workers to the city.
But they deliberately and legally capped the housing supply.
The predictable, inescapable mathematical result was a chronic, severe shortage, astronomical rent prices, and the massive displacement of any working-class resident who wasn't pulling in a senior software engineer's salary.
So what is the actionable takeaway for San Francisco here? Is it just abolish zoning?
Well, the lesson isn't necessarily to become Houston overnight. The lesson from Houston is to streamline by default.
Right. Shift from a system where every single new building requires discretionary approval and public hearings to a by-right system.
If a builder's blueprint meets the city's basic safety codes, height limits, and design standards for a duplex, they should be able to walk into City Hall and get the permit over the counter.
No endless public hearings, no arbitrary vetoes from neighbors.
Which sounds so logically simple, but it requires a massive fundamental rewiring of how a city thinks about its own need for control.
It requires a surrender of micromanagement. And to be perfectly fair to the source, it notes Houston is not a utopia.
Oh, definitely not.
The lack of zoning contributes to massive infrastructure strain. They have severe, well-documented flooding issues exacerbated by paving over wetlands.
And providing truly affordable housing for the extremely low-income segment is still a major challenge.
But on the pure, vital metric of supply elasticity, building enough homes quickly enough so the middle class isn't priced into poverty, Houston's deregulated approach vastly outperforms San Francisco's hyper-regulated model.
Okay, so let's imagine a scenario where San Francisco somehow adopts this Houston mindset. They streamline permitting, they legalize townhomes across the city, they neuter the review boards, and they start building housing at scale.
That would be a massive victory.
But if you think about it macroeconomically, it's only half the battle. Because once you have hundreds of thousands of people living in these new homes, they have to physically move around the region.
You cannot solve a housing crisis without regional transit.
Exactly. But before we get to the source's radical sci-fi solution for transit, we have to look at the ghosts of the past. We have to understand why California struggles to build infrastructure. Let's examine the ultimate cautionary tale, the California high-speed rail.
If you want to deeply understand the limits of California's governance model, the high-speed rail project is the definitive case study. It is the physical manifestation in concrete and steel of the bureaucratic paralysis we've been discussing.
The numbers here are just breathtaking, and not in a good way. The source breaks down the timeline. Voters approved the high-speed rail bond measure way back in 2008.
2008, let that sink in.
Right. And the pitch to the public was simple, elegant, and inspiring. Connect the economic hubs of San Francisco and Los Angeles with state-of-the-art bullet trains, just like they have in Japan or France. The original estimated cost given to voters, about $33 billion.
Now, fast forward to mid-2026. What is the current status of that $33 billion promise?
As of 2026, the estimated costs have exploded to anywhere between $126 billion and $231 billion.
And for all that money, is there a single operational high-speed train carrying passengers between SF and LA?
Zero. 18 years later, tens of billions of dollars have been spent, and the tangible result is mostly a mountain of environmental impact reports, staggering litigation fees, and some partial concrete viaducts standing isolated in the Central Valley, which realistically might not see partial operational service until the 2030s.
Federal funding has been threatened or cut at various points. It is a generational disaster of execution.
I have to understand the mechanics of this failure. How does a budget go from $33 billion to potentially $250 billion? I know we talked about the rigid city charter in San Francisco causing local delays, but this is a massive statewide project backed by the governor. It's not just inflation.
The root causes are systemic to California's entire governance structure. The source identifies several massive culprits, but the most prominent is the weaponization of environmental litigation, specifically a law called CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA was originally passed in the 1970s with the incredibly noble intention of protecting the environment. The idea was to force government agencies to disclose and mitigate the environmental impacts of a project before approving it.
Which makes total sense. Keep the rivers clean, stop toxic dumping in poor neighborhoods, protect endangered species habitats.
But over the decades, the mechanics of CEQA have been entirely weaponized. The law allows almost anyone, an individual, a rival business, an anonymous community group, to file a lawsuit known as a writ of mandate, demanding deeper and deeper environmental reviews.
It has become the ultimate low-cost tool for opponents to stall projects indefinitely.
So you have a high-speed rail line, which is arguably the greenest, most environmentally beneficial infrastructure project imaginable, designed to take millions of gas-burning cars and short-haul flights out of the sky.
And ironically, it gets sued into oblivion under the guise of environmental protection.
Yeah.
I want to visualize how this actually happens. How does a CEQA lawsuit stop a train?
Imagine the state decides the train route needs to pass near a specific town. A local group, or perhaps a well-funded coalition of local gas station owners who don't want the competition, forms an anonymous shell organization called Citizens for a Quiet Valley.
Okay.
They file a CEQA lawsuit claiming the state's 5,000-page environmental review didn't adequately study the noise impact on a specific local bird species or the traffic impact on a local intersection during construction.
And then what happens?
The court issues an injunction. The project stops. The state spends 2 years and millions of dollars conducting a supplementary review. The group sues again, claiming the new review is flawed. The cycle
That
repeats.
is a tragic irony. You have armies of lawyers using regulations that were meant to protect communities to essentially bleed a project dry, a project that would elevate those same communities.
Beyond CEQA, the source points to severe political mismanagement. There was massive scope creep. The route was constantly being changed and zigzagged to satisfy powerful local politicians who demanded train stops in their specific districts.
And every new stop slowed the trains down and ballooned the engineering budget.
Furthermore, there was incredibly fragmented oversight, overly optimistic ridership and cost assumptions presented to the public, and strict labor rules that inflated construction costs far beyond the global averages you see in Europe or Asia for similar rail projects.
They prioritized the politics of building a massive, all-encompassing statewide system that made everyone happy over the pragmatism of just finishing one high-impact, functional segment. It's exactly what the author meant by prioritizing process over outcomes.
The system is structurally designed to accommodate every single stakeholder's grievance, which mathematically ensures that the project itself can never actually be built.
Okay, so if traditional rail is hopelessly stuck in this political and legal quicksand, and it might cost $250 billion to never finish it, what if we just leapfrog the entire concept of traditional rail? The source makes an incredibly provocative sci-fi proposal: an underground Hyperloop connecting the Bay Area to the Central Valley.
To understand why the author suggests something as radical and experimental as a hyperloop, we have to look at the brutal economic mismatch driving the region. We talked about San Francisco's housing shortage. The median home price in the Bay Area in 2026 is sitting between $1.2 and $1.5 million. It is completely inaccessible for average workers, teachers, nurses, or service staff.
But just 100 to 150 miles inland, you have the Central Valley cities like Merced, Fresno, and Modesto. Out there, the median home price drops to a much more manageable $400,000 to $520,000. It's a completely different universe of affordability.
And people are already reacting to that massive economic gradient. The source notes the brutal, exhausting reality of supercommuting. Up to 10% of the commuters in some Central Valley counties are people driving 3 or 4 hours every single day, or taking agonizingly slow regional trains just to access the high-paying jobs in the Bay Area while living somewhere they can actually afford a mortgage.
It's a massive, invisible drain on human capital, family time, and well-being. So, the Hyperloop vision. For those unfamiliar, we're talking about pods traveling through low-pressure, underground tubes at near supersonic speeds using magnetic levitation. In theory, this technology could shrink a grueling 3-hour drive into a 20 to 40-minute ride.
Think about the massive paradigm shift there. If you can get from downtown Fresno to downtown San Francisco in 30 minutes, the Central Valley is no longer a distant, disconnected agricultural region. It instantly becomes a highly functional, highly affordable bedroom extension of the Bay Area economy. You effectively relieve the extreme pressure cooker of San Francisco's housing market by instantly unlocking millions of acres of affordable land just a half-hour commute away.
It sounds incredible. It sounds like exactly what the region needs to survive economically. But I have to push back hard on the source here. Is this just another tech utopian distraction? We're talking about 2026. There is no full-scale, operational, passenger-carrying intercity Hyperloop anywhere on planet Earth. The physics of maintaining a near vacuum over hundreds of miles are incredibly hard. The source even brings up the massive earthquake risks in California. Aren't we just daydreaming about vacuum tubes to avoid doing the hard, grinding, politically dangerous work of fixing San Francisco's local zoning laws?
That is a very fair, highly pragmatic critique, and to the author's credit, the source completely validates that pushback. They explicitly state that conventional, unglamorous alternatives like extending the existing PART system, electrifying the Caltrain commuter rail, and passing widespread by-right zoning for housing locally in SF are absolutely necessary and should be done immediately. The Hyperloop is not presented as a magic bullet to replace local reform.
So why even dedicate a massive section of the document to a speculative technology?
Because of the governance prerequisite it represents, the author is using the extreme technical difficulty of the Hyperloop to make a profound point about how California must legally change its approach to building anything. The absolute cardinal rule the source lays out is this: Do not attempt to build a Hyperloop or any next-generation infrastructure using the same legal and political system that built the high-speed rail.
Right, you can't put cutting-edge technology through a broken 1970s meat grinder.
To even attempt a project of this magnitude requires what the author calls revolutionary governance fixes. We are talking about the state legislature passing completely new enabling legislation that explicitly overrides the old rules.
What does that actually look like in practice? How do you legally insulate a project like this?
It means structuring the project as a true public-private partnership, or P3. But not the kind where the state just writes a blank check to a contractor. It means the private operators bear the vast majority of the financial risk of cost overruns, not the taxpayers. It means the legislature legally exempting the project from frivolous CEQA litigation so the project can actually break ground without spending a decade in court. Most importantly, it means instituting strict performance-based funding.
Meaning the money is held in escrow.
Essentially, the government funds are only released when clear physical milestones are met, like finishing a mile of tunnel or demonstrating a successful pod test. And if the private company fails to deliver, the contract includes severe financial clawbacks.
So the technology itself, whether it's a Hyperloop, a maglev train, or just an incredibly efficient dedicated bus rapid transit system, almost doesn't matter. The point the author is making is about the mindset, prioritizing speed, absolute accountability, and actual physical results over an endless process of bureaucratic appeasement.
The mindset required to successfully build a Hyperloop is the exact same mindset San Francisco desperately needs to clean its streets, build its housing, and audit its homelessness nonprofits. It is a demand for baseline competence and the political courage to override the paralyzing status quo.
We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We've looked at the broken local structure of San Francisco, the hyper-efficient technocracy of Singapore, the deregulated housing boom of Houston, the tragic disaster of the high-speed rail, and the sci-fi legal framework needed for a Hyperloop. Let's pull all of these disparate threads together and synthesize them into something truly actionable. Let's look at the 2026 blueprint. What does all this mean for the listener, and how does the city actually fix itself?
The source distills all of this comparative data down into a very clear, evidence-based 5-step fix for San Francisco's recovery. And really, this operates as a blueprint for any major city struggling with these cascading issues. Let's walk through them. Step 1, enforcement and treatment.
This means actively moving away from a purely ideology-driven harm reduction model. It means a consistent, visible policing of public drug use and sprawling street encampments. It requires compassion, absolutely, but compassion paired with mandatory accountability and forced treatment for severe mental health and addiction cases. The realization that a housing-first policy doesn't work if there is no sobriety metric or psychiatric intervention for those who desperately need it.
Step 2, housing supply. We take the stark lesson from Houston here. Cities must aggressively deregulate zoning and permitting, end the excessive, weaponized appeals process, fast-track infill development near transit hubs, and allow density by right. If you want to lower the cost of living, you have to reduce the artificial, legally imposed costs of construction by getting the bureaucracy out of the way.
Step 3, accountability and spending. This is the end of the ballot box budgeting black holes. Cities need to rigorously, independently audit all homelessness and social programs, consolidate overlapping agencies into a single chain of command, and ruthlessly tie every single dollar of public funding to actual, verified outcomes like permanent exits to stable housing, rather than just paying nonprofits for the ongoing process of managing the crisis.
Step 4, basic services. This is the core Singapore lesson. Get the simple, boring things right. Deploy dedicated street cleaning teams, ensure rapid responses to illegal dumping, power wash the sidewalks, and enforce basic anti-littering laws. A city that tolerates visible physical decay on its core commercial streets signals to everyone that the government has lost control.
And finally, Step 5, governance reform. This is the root of the tree, the operating system upgrade. Cities need to rewrite their archaic charters, eliminate the endless maze of independent, unaccountable commissions, give the elected executive branch the actual authority to execute their mandate, and use evidence-based budgeting rather than political earmarks.
And we really need to connect this back to anyone listening, regardless of where they live. Why should you, in your hometown, care about the minutia of San Francisco's city charter, or Houston's lot size regulations, or Singapore's land acquisition laws? Because the fundamental, overarching battle we've been tracking today, the battle between prioritizing an endless process versus demanding tangible outcomes, is happening inside your local city hall right now.
Think about the last time you saw a major transit project delayed in your area, or wondered why a simple apartment building took 4 years to go up. It affects everyone, whether you live in a town of 10,000 people or a sprawling metro of 10 million.
Understanding these distinct models gives you X-ray vision into your own civic environment. The next time you look at a zoning map or read about a city budget deficit, you can ask the diagnostic questions. Does my local government operate like a rigid, veto-heavy bureaucracy like pre-2026 San Francisco? Does it operate with the unified, outcome-focused efficiency of a corporate board like Singapore? Or does it leverage a deregulated, market-driven approach to supply like Houston?
Answering those questions helps you understand exactly why your own rent is so high, why your morning commute is so agonizingly long, or why your neighborhood streets are clean. It demystifies the physical world outside your door. It stops being just abstract politics and starts being about structural mechanics and applied physics.
And ultimately, it empowers you as a voter, a taxpayer, and a citizen to demand the structural root cause changes that actually yield physical results, rather than just voting for a different flavor of political rhetoric every 4 years.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive. But we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, something that circles all the way back to the digital versus physical contrast we discussed at the very beginning of the show.
The ultimate paradox of the modern metropolis.
Think about this reality. San Francisco possesses the raw intellectual capital to invent world-changing artificial intelligence. It has the biotech talent to map the human genome and cure diseases. It built the digital infrastructure that currently connects billions of people globally. Yet for years, with $1 billion annual budget, it struggled to figure out how to keep a few square miles of its own physical sidewalks clean, safe, and navigable.
It is a profound, almost tragic mismatch in human capabilities.
So the lingering question is, what does that say about humanity's future if our technological evolution continues to accelerate into the stratosphere while our civic evolution remains stubbornly, hopelessly stuck in the mud? If we can conceptualize and build a flawless trillion-dollar digital economy in the cloud, but we can't master the ancient analog art of running a physical city efficiently, are we actually advancing as a civilization? Or are we just building shiny new apps on a fundamentally broken operating system?
That might be the defining question of the 21st century.
Something to mull over the next time you're stuck in traffic or waiting on a delayed train. Until next time, thanks for taking the deep dive with us.